I'm going to focus on the catalytic potential of the photographs and records relating to the life and brutal murder of anti-apartheid activist Amit Timol, and on the far-reaching effects of the 2017 reopening of the inquest into his death, more than 40 years after he was killed. Timol was detained, tortured, and murdered by the security police, who threw him from the 10th floor of the notorious John Vorster Square police station in Johannesburg in October 1971. The security police claimed that he had committed suicide. Timol's mother, Howard Timol, testified at the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which convened public hearings between 1996 and 1998 to investigate human rights abuses perpetrated between the 1st of March 1960 and the 31st of December 1993. At the TRC, no one confessed their responsibility or applied for amnesty for her son's death. When the 7-volume TRC report was released in 2003, more than 300 unresolved cases involving gross violations of human rights in which amnesty was either denied or not applied for were handed over to the National Prosecuting Authority on the understanding that they would be investigated and that those responsible would be prosecuted. Since that time, and in spite of the tireless campaigning on the part of family members of those who were killed, the cases of activists who were detained, tortured, and murdered by the security police during apartheid have been systematically suppressed for political reasons. The reopening of the Amit Timol inquest in 2017 was spearheaded by Timol's nephew, Imtiaz Kaji, who has compiled a massive evidence relating to his uncle's murder, all of which he has digitized and made available online. This material has provided the basis for 2 books by Kaji, Timol, A Quest for Justice, 2005, and The Murder of Amit Timol, which is published this year, 2020. Numerous news articles, a documentary film, and an exhibition that has traveled to several locations in South Africa. In addition, and most importantly, the research Kaji undertook revealed new information that finally led the state to reopen the inquest into his uncle's death. The landmark verdict delivered in the case, which declared that Timol was murdered, has made it possible for other unresolved cases of activists who were killed to be reopened, and for perpetrators of human rights abuses committed under apartheid to be prosecuted. The circulation of photographs of activists such as Timol has reactivated and mobilized memories within the public sphere of those who were killed. These photographs operate in a number of ways. They testify to the atrocities committed under apartheid. They mark the refusal of the families of those who were killed to allow these acts to be forgotten, and they memorialize those who were tortured and killed. I think of these images as holding a light that is reignited when they are lifted up and seen in the present, and when they are used not simply to allow us to see the past, but to return the course of history. These photographs interrupt transitional time, the suspended time after the past and before the future, and return us to political time, the time of action in the present. The photographs and the reopened cases of which they form part return history in more than one sense. They return those who view them to the time in which they were taken, making it possible for us to see into the past. And they return the course of history by disrupting the closure that political elites maintain the end of apartheid and the TRC process signified. I'm going to show you some images, and I'm going to begin with an image. It's a screenshot of the 33 black and white photographs on the Amit Timol website. It's a gallery of photographs which are arranged in rows of 5 small images that, when you click on them, open in larger scale. Photographs of Timol with his family, with his fellow trainee teachers at the Johannesburg Training Institute for Indian Teachers, and with the students he taught at Rudaput Indian High School between 1964 and 1966, are positioned alongside portraits of Timol during the time he spent in England in 1967 and 68, before he was sent by the South African Communist Party and the African National Congress for 9 months of training at the International Lenin School in Moscow in 1969. These photographs appear alongside those of his body lying in an open casket, of his funeral, and of his family grieving his death. Each small square that opens into a time of hope and possibility is juxtaposed with images that convey a time of terrible loss. Two images were almost certainly taken by a street photographer in Johannesburg, and they are interesting, partly because they can be understood as instances of what Marion Hirsch and Leo Spitzer have termed incongruous images, photographs that seem to refuse to testify to the alarming context in which they were taken. These photographs show us something of what it meant to walk through public space as a person categorized by the apartheid state as Indian, and therefore as a target for state-sanctioned violence. And they show this precisely because they do not show us what we expect to see when we look at images of violence. Because of this, these photographs instruct us to look more carefully, to consider whether these young men are dressed so immaculately because in the context in which they find themselves, it is necessary for them to assert their dignity, to present themselves to the world as confident and self-assured, but also to be guarding themselves, protecting others, or even to dress so sharply that it is an affront to those who think themselves superior in every way, a small yet not so subtle assertion of their worldliness, of their sense of belonging, that exceeds the narrow confines of racist, retrogressive 1960s South Africa. In the first photograph, Ahmed Timol's open face and broad smile convey a sense of ease in public space, something that finds its opposite in Suleiman Suji, who walks alongside him, his stern face turned in suspicion towards the photographer, who has just snapped a pair of friends walking in the street. In this photograph, everything still lies ahead. The anxious look on the face of Suleiman Suji, which could even be read as hostile, casts a shadow over Timol's apparent happiness. Because both men are looking at the photographer, their gaze is also directed at us. Timol trusts us to see him, to recognize him in the future. His friend's skeptical look asks us why we are looking at them, warns us that we'd better have a good answer, reminds us that this photograph could easily have been taken by the security police who were monitoring Timol's movements. In the second image, Timol is shown as a well-dressed young man, his jacket buttoned, his tie perfectly straight, and in his breast pocket, a neatly folded handkerchief. Behind him, none of their faces visible, are four women walking along what appears to be a shopping street. Here, it seems, he has been snapped, just as he noticed the presence of the photographer. And in this image, even more than the first, there is the quality of a surveillance photograph. The photograph is stained with something that looks like a streak of ink that marks the place where Timol's body overlaps with that of the woman who is walking away from the photographer, just behind him. The woman's high heel shoe and pale leg identify her as white, and because the photograph is overexposed, she appears to be walking into a white void, as much as Timol seems to be moving beyond it, striding towards the future. At the same time, we can see, and only as a result of the strange ways in which photographs do more than capture the real, the ground disappearing from under his feet. Once again, we are forced to remember that we are witnessing an emblematic apartheid scene where a Black man is walking through a world that was reserved for white people, and where, no matter how genteel his appearance, he was cast as a criminal, treated as subhuman, and marked for death. These portraits appear alongside several photographs taken on the day of Ahmed Timol's funeral on the 29th of October, 1971. Kaji describes how Timol's body was brought to his grandparents' home and placed outside in an open casket where large numbers of people lined up and filed past to witness his body and to pay respects to the family. Here you can see the massive crowd outside the Timol family home on the day of the funeral. And here you can see the thousands of mourners as they walked through the streets of Roodepoort near Johannesburg, following the hearse, carrying the body to the cemetery. This photograph was taken at the cemetery, and this image shows the grief of Ahmed Timol's father and his youngest brother, as well as other mourners at the funeral. Photographs of those who were murdered or who were disappeared by the security police are significant as a precious form of memory of those who were killed, and take on an additional significance as evidence not only of their lives, but of their unresolved deaths. That is to say, these photographs are more than memorial images. They are loaded with political force and are animated through reproduction and circulation across local and transnational space, and importantly, across time. The dis-ease of the post-apartheid condition is often described through the metaphor of haunting. However, this is to misunderstand the phenomenology of memory and how the generation of survivors, family members, loved ones, and born-frees embody the ongoing struggle for justice of their ancestors. The metaphor of haunting cannot account for the talismanic and political force of these photographs in summoning not the ghostly presence of those who were murdered or forcibly disappeared, but their living descendants who gather together in the name of those who were killed and continue the struggle for justice. These photographs operate as tangible signs of the crime against humanity that was apartheid, and as evidence that can be used to make and substantiate not only legal claims, but claims to belonging, to humanness, and to the dignity denied to those who were murdered during apartheid. In recalling the dead, they issue a call to the living. In July 2020, a petition was circulated by Qasim Khan, coordinator of the Imam Harun Commemoration Committee, and issued on behalf of families and friends of apartheid-era victims, calling on President Cyril Ramaphosa to open a commission of inquiry to find out the reasons for the undue delays by the National Prosecuting Authority in investigating and prosecuting over 300 TRC cases. The petition was accompanied by an image composed of several photographs that portray activists who were murdered by the security police, their funerals, and the loved ones who survived them. Each portrait testifies to the individual crimes of apartheid, and in addition, the collective assemblage of faces of those who were killed, their family members who have since passed away without establishing the truth about their deaths, and those who have survived to seek justice, testifies to apartheid as a crime against humanity. The collective portrait provides a form of visual affirmation of the position articulated by the Southern African Litigation Center, a civil society organization that has called for those accused of murders committed under apartheid to be tried for crimes against humanity. They argue that the Timol case is not about a single murder, It is about how a single murder is connected to the system of apartheid and therefore becomes a crime against humanity. The crime of apartheid has never been prosecuted, and this case should pave the way for such prosecutions to commence. However, just as was the case with Nazi perpetrators after the end of the Second World War, many of those who held power in the apartheid-era security establishment and could have shed light on human rights violations have died without ever standing trial, taking their knowledge with them to their graves. In 2013, when a campaign was launched in Germany to pursue surviving Nazis who had evaded capture, it operated under the slogan, "Late, but not too late." But by this time, Mary Fulbrook writes, it was precisely that, way past the point for any serious legal reckoning with Nazi perpetrators, or for caring adequately for the needs of those who had suffered at their hands. The question of whether it is too late for justice to be done is a critical one in South Africa today. The photographs and records relating to the TRC cases have been made visible at what historian Jacob Lamini describes as a perilous moment in how we remember the history of apartheid. A time when memories of the apartheid past and its depravities threaten to disappear altogether, unless we, taking inspiration from Walter Benjamin, recognize and seize them in the present. These photographs and records may enter what Benjamin terms empty homogeneous time that marks the suspension of the transitional state, but as a call to the living to seize hold of them and mobilize them against the triumphal procession in which the present rulers step over those who are lying prostrate. They have the potential to return us to political time and return to us a revolutionary chance in the fight for the oppressed past. While the work of memory can only metaphorically resurrect the dead, remembering those who were meant to be expunged from social memory is to refute the intentions of those who gave the orders to eliminate so-called terrorists and those who carried out these deeds. To remember them in order to hold those who killed them to account is to go even further. It is to recognize the failed project that was the apartheid state. And more than this, it is to refuse to allow its strategy of violence and erasure to lay claim to the future. The photographs of the activists who were murdered by the security police and of their loved ones who survived them and who are pictured together in the petition calling on the current state to reopen the unresolved cases into their deaths testifies to how resistance to the annihilatory logics of apartheid continues in the present. Thank you.